Kyle, let's start with the ebb and flow of this movie. You have a writing partner, Steve Tim. You guys have known each other forever. What is it about writing with Steve that you like, that just clicks? I mean, when did you guys first realize, okay, we need to tackle stories together?
Well, this Reparation is the result of a script we started writing together 21 years ago. Steve was my theater professor and faculty advisor at DePaul when I was an undergrad. I studied theater. My first class there was his first class as a professor.
Wow.
And he directed the only staging to date of this play called The Activist during my junior year. I saw it as an undergrad and was blown away by it. And then when I moved out to LA and started kind of working the film business and wanting to think about what would be my El Mariachi, what would be my low budget indie film that I can break through with, that was the story I wanted to tell. That was the one that stuck with me. And so I called up Steve and I said, I'd like to adapt this for a film screenplay. And he said, why don't we work on it together? And I was like, are you kidding me? Great. I mean, he's a veteran. He's a National Playwriting Award winning playwright. And he's brilliant. So for me, I was like, of course. So he's very much, in terms of writing, he's very much been a mentor to me. I think it took us about 4 years to figure out how to write together.
Wow.
I mean, this was 1994, 1995. So also when I was in LA, he was in Indiana, when we would send notes back and forth on the script, we had to do it by fax. And we didn't have email yet. So I still have some of those original notes, like either handwritten or typed up on the paper you had to tear the edges off of, like the old dot matrix printers and stuff. So this one's been around for a long time. I think it took us about 4 years to figure out how to let go of the play. That was the first thing. We kept trying to sort of adapt a play for the screen, and what we actually figured out that we needed to do was throw out the play completely. Look at what is the story that we want to tell here? What are those characters' journeys? And we wrote every one of the characters' full life story from beginning to end, and that informed us of what the new structure of this thing needed to be.
Wow.
And so the movie doesn't resemble the play nearly at all, except for maybe one sort of monologue that stuck around from the original play, that we kind of wanted to keep as much of that as we could.
Wow.
So yeah, and we've written other things together, and we have another one that we're working on now together, and I think we'll just continue to collaborate because it works. We're very different kinds of writers. I mean, and part of that is a slight generational difference.
Yeah.
He's about 15 years my senior, so when he went to grad school and was learning to write, he was doing it on a typewriter. And I grew up in the word processing early Mac days, and so I could cut and paste and whatever.
Yeah.
So our approaches are so different. If we're writing a scene or writing a sequence, he'll think on it for several days, and then when it's ready, he'll write it, and it'll be pretty much done. I'll write it up first and then rewrite it and then rework it and think about it and then rework it and move stuff around and rewrite it. And we'll arrive maybe at the same place, but totally different means to get there.
It's fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But when we work together in a room, none of that matters. It's not about executing the scenes at that point. It's about nailing down the themes and nailing down what the overall action is, and that kind of stuff. It just works.
Well, I'm kind of curious. You guys shot in Indiana too.
Yeah.
Can you talk about deciding to shoot there, not in LA, and how that kind of helped you, hindered you? I mean, what was the impact of shooting? Was it Green Castle? Is that where it's
Green
at?
Castle, yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the college town where Steve, works as a professor, and where I went to undergrad, and a lot of the work that we did on the script we were doing there. I would go out there for a few months at a time, over the summers, so we could write and work on it. And I think inevitably we were writing to that environment. I mean, the story was set, Indiana, small town Indiana anyway. So when we finally, many, many years later, decided let's just raise as much money as we can and do this ourselves, I knew that we had to do it in Greencastle because, I hoped at least that DePaul would be able to support us a little bit. With the campus, we kind of had the Air Force, we could have a little bit of Air Force base there. I thought it'd be something, I hoped it would be something that the town would be kind of fired up and excited about. It's a really quiet town, especially over the summer, a little small Indiana, farm town, college town, not much going on over the summer. So, and it really became a community effort. The Greencastle community, the Putnam County community, and the university community all sort of got involved, and I think really loved the process and loved seeing how this thing would come together. So it was really beneficial for us to shoot it there. Our crew, the university helped put our whole cast and crew up in one of their dorms.
Okay.
So, and I was, as a producer, I was terrified about that because it could have gone very wrong. I mean, you put everybody in that close of quarters that they're working together all day long, and everybody needs a little space afterwards. Yeah. But it was not even into the first week, and they were cooking breakfast together. I'd come by, in the morning, and they'd be like in their boxers or towels or whatever, like just cooking and laughing, and they'd drink together after. It was like they all described it as like movie camp. Or like the sort of film school campus thing that they maybe never had. Everybody just had a blast with it. It was a challenging shoot. So I think that, again, that sense of community was really helpful, actually.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the cast, because we were talking a bit before this. We're familiar with Mark, but tell us about how you got the rest of the cast, how you got Mark involved, and what he felt about the script. Because his journey alone is so, he basically touches every type of emotion you can think of in a film. Yeah. How'd you get this cast together?
So one of the first, probably the third phone call I made when we decided we were going to do this and do it independently with as much money as we could raise, I knew that cast was going to be critical. And one of the casting directors in LA that I knew from DePaul. He graduated a year ahead of me. His name is Matt LaSalle, and he's now like one of the top casting directors, especially for indie films, for low-budget indie films. And it turns out, coincidentally, not so coincidentally, he also played the original Jerome in the original staging of the play that this is based on. So when I called him up about it, and he said, I got to read the script. And so I sent him the script, and he immediately called me. He's like, Kyle, you cannot let anyone else cast this movie. I have to cast this movie. Like, I was the original Jerome. This is an amazing script. I have to cast the movie. You have to let me cast it. So that was like, a godsend for us to have him, because he knew who would look at a script like this, even knowing that it's like extremely low budget. He knew who would consider that kind of work. He knew who would work hard on set, who had the chops to kind of take on these kind of layered characters. So John was actually cast first.
Which makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, it was the Jerome role was the one we were most, I think, concerned about up front, because that combination of being charming, annoying, and menacing all at once is not that easy to find in actors. That's kind of that's just a quality that certain people have and can do, and it can't necessarily be trained. And so I was most nervous about that one. And then John walks into this audition carrying a motorcycle helmet he rode his motorcycle to the audition, and he was completely off book, completely prepared, and just nailed it. And I was like, wow. So we knew the minute he walked out the door, I was like, we need to make an offer there. We need to get him on this movie. Wow. And Mark had read for it from New York, and he has such an intensity about him. And that was the thing that caught me, is he has this like, there's a quiet explosiveness about Mark.
Well, I like that, yeah.
It always just seems to be lingering, and you don't know when it's going to come out, that he had that heavy internalization that I think that the role of Bob needed. Jerome was the one I was most concerned about casting. Bob was the one I was most concerned about an actor being able to do, to bring those kind of layers to it. I thought that would be the hardest one to accomplish, the hardest role to accomplish. And we got our guy with Mark. I mean, he's when I met with him, it was almost, my first meeting with him, it was almost like he was already channeling the character. I mean, he would just kind of drift off. And I don't know if he was doing that in the meeting deliberately, but Mark was a joy to work with. He was, I like to describe him as a lion. And his approach to the character, he has a very Meisner-based approach to his work. So it's a very all-in, and it's one of the reasons that he and Virginia worked. Like, that chemistry was so good. They have very similar approaches to acting and to the way they approach a character. So they were both just all in from the beginning, on camera, off camera, live and breathe these characters. And so, you know, and Mark is one of those who completely just goes there. There were times off camera we'd have a half hour, you know, changeover between scenes, or just, you know, doing a new camera setup, and it'd be one of those scenes where he's searching for the drawing that he can't find, and I look over and everybody's kind of horsing around on set, or, you know, working or whatever, and John's kind of horsing around because that's his thing, and I look over and Mark's just pacing back and forth searching for that drawing for 20 minutes.
Wow.
He just stayed in that state of mind the whole time. He's very, very intense, and that is exactly what that role needed from an actor. So we were incredibly fortunate to get him. I mean, he's an amazing talent.
You know, there's the actual line skips me, but there's a line about dogs and children.
Oh yeah, dogs and kids, can't fool them when it comes to rotten.
Yeah. Let's jump back to you and Steve. I don't want to jump back and forth, but I was amazed at the dialogue. There were a lot of lines where I just like, boy, that fits perfectly. Yeah. It's not cheesy. There's nothing hammed about it. There's nothing that just screams, oh, I'm just putting in a line here. Uh-huh. How was it, because it was based on the play, that you guys knew the dialogue would have to be crisp and flow nicely? I mean, do you guys write together dialogue? How does that work?
We don't tend to write dialogue together. We tend to do that. You know, we'll write the overall structure of things, and we know what the scenes are, and we know what the actions are, and we'll usually divide and conquer when it comes to dialogue.
Wow.
Steve, as a veteran playwright, I mean, his dialogue writing is, you know, bar none, and probably a lot of that voice in the dialogue, and those kinds of lines like, you know, dogs and kids, can't fool them when it comes to rotten. You know, that's Steve. That's where Steve really shines and comes through, and the comedy that he would bring in to certain scenes, like the scene in the kitchen where they're cooking, and the gopher, you know, stuff. I could eat gopher. You know, that's Steve's got a little bit of the coyote, a little bit of the trickster in him anyway. So he loves to take a scene that would otherwise be serious and screw around a little bit within it, and it's a great formula because, or it's great chemistry in that way, because in a film with as much tension as we have here, it was important for us to find those well-timed moments to get people to laugh a little bit. You need to release that every once in a while so that you can quickly build it back up again.
You say that, I kind of want to bring up one particular scene then.
Yeah.
The chase sequence where we first encounter John. We don't know it's John, but he's on the motorbike, and Brody pops into the truck.
Yeah.
Or, you know, is there. I don't want to spoil anything. But Brody drops the line, you know, you could go faster, you didn't have this 71 POS. It was like, it's so genius timing, and then it's like, because this is kind of a scary moment. You don't know who the hell this guy is.
Yeah.
What was it like working off? You know, we talked a little bit about how Mark and Brody had a connection. What was it working with those two guys? Because they seemed to connect so well.
Yeah.
It was kind of amazing to see it on screen.
Yeah, they bonded quickly. It was like they were best friends, and Brody just looks up to Mark so much. Brody's just the sweetest kid. He's just a great kid to be around, and everybody on the set, we all just love Brody. I mean, both our kids were fantastic. Very different personalities, those two, Dale and Brody. But Brody and Mark really bonded, and so working with them, that made it very easy. And I think Mark, as a seasoned actor, also, I have to give him credit a little bit. He's also a director. He's a filmmaker. So I think he was, in his own way, kind of working with Brody. He wasn't running lines with him. It wasn't rehearsing. He wasn't directing him, but there was an influence there, and there was sort of a mentorship going on there. But that friendship between them, I think, really, really came through on screen. And it's a division of Bob's personality there. That Ralph, the kid's name is Ralph, that we never hear it on screen. Ralph is the young Bob that kind of got lost. Both the highly functional cop side of him that Bob can't access anymore, but also some of the sense of humor almost that Bob seemed to have lost with what happened. And so we really wanted that to come out through Ralph. And that Ralph could sweep in and manage those situations and disarm Bob's level of stress in those moments. So when Lucy's giving birth and things like that, to come in and, okay, I know the first aid techniques on this. Well, that's the cop in Bob. Who knows
intense scene, by the way.
Yeah,
very intense.
Virginia was great in that.
Wow.
But Brody really, he had an instant understanding of what was funny about those, like the 71 POS line and the chase scene. He understood what was funny about that, even as an 8-year-old kid. Like, he was pretty tuned in to the comedy of that character, so it made it pretty easy.
Looking at films that deal with PTSD, it's so tough because most of it, they would concentrate only on the Bob character or like the Jerome character. Virginia's performance is really fascinating because I think she plays such a real person that has to deal with this, doesn't like maybe that whole side of him. She doesn't like cops. She's doesn't like authority. She's obviously very anti that authority, and yet she's fallen in love with this former cop who doesn't have those memories. But having her character, whenever he goes through a fit or goes through a scene, the way she handles him is kind of like, just get over it, move on. And she's kind of mean to him to an extent. I'm curious, when you were crafting her character, did you have in mind like a real person? Because I felt like so many PTS stories, they take a step back from the surrounding characters, don't allow them to have their impact with what's going on mentally with that person. Yeah. Her character's working with him the entire time, and it's in the movie. We get to see it. Was that always something you had to capture with her character?
Yeah, Lucy's character, one of the reasons we cast Virginia Newcomb specifically in that role, of all the actors that we looked at, is because she could have that sort of acerbic toughness about her, but she definitely has a softness, right? There's a very caring quality to her as well, and we wanted that balance in there because it would have been very easy for Lucy to become too tough and too hard-edged and too unsympathetic, like that we would just dislike her if an actor took it too far in that direction. So we wanted somebody who could bring the love there in that relationship. And yeah, she is tough on Bob, but she's incredibly loving with him too. And there are many of those moments where she just kind of loves him back. She's not going and getting him help. She's not getting him to the VA. She's not confronting what goes on. She's in denial with him. She enables his denial. But that's her tactic, and she commits to it. And from the get-go, she sees that it seems to help, And so she is committed to that. We don't need to talk about this. It's better not to talk about it. We need to move on, move forward. You don't dwell in the past. You move forward through things. So that was for her something that we wanted her to go in and stick with. Like if she thinks that's going to work, she's going to commit to it. Lucy's the kind of character who believes she's right and she's just going to go with it. And it ends up, that's what drives her to the edge in the end, is that tactic runs into a brick wall that she doesn't know how to deal with. And it's a very difficult moment for her. That moment with her and Marty in the car towards the end in that last chase scene, we actually wrote, Steve and Virginia got together off set to really craft that moment on the day we were shooting it. We knew what that was the only scene that wasn't specifically scripted before, and everything else is pretty much, the film is pretty much what was scripted. But that scene, we knew it needed something, but we knew that we needed our actress involved in what that was going to be.
Wow.
And it really paid off, because that moment really worked, because that was the culmination of where she had been headed, where her train tracks had been headed all along. But we really wanted the actor involved in that one.
Yeah, it's definitely powerful.
But I think Virginia, the work that she and Mark did offset to make sure that beyond the tension that was there between them, that everything else was love. The tension we knew was going to come through where it needed to come through anyway. What they needed to deliver on screen at all other times was the love that was there, so that we really believe these two people need each other, and we understand why that works. Yeah.
What made you guys go with, because I'm guessing this isn't part of the play portion, the father-daughter connection to the point that it's cerebral, it's psychological. She sees what he's gone through. I know that's maybe the unexplained part of the film, but like, where did that whole element come from? Because it's fascinating.
Yeah, thank you. In the play, it was a little less developed, and it was Charlotte had sort of a clairvoyance, but there wasn't any grounding to it. And Steve and I knew when we finally let go of the play and threw everything out and decided to start again from scratch, that was one of the first things we had to really identify and clarify and give grounding to, is, okay, this can't just be clairvoyance. That's a device. This needs to be grounded in something. And at the time, the genetic research has come a long way in the 20 years or 15 years since we decided to kind of rewrite the script. So at that time, the only study that was available, there was a study about bacteria, and that they could traumatize bacteria, and that there would be evidence of that trauma on the bacteria's like offspring, or whatever you call it.
Yeah.
That they could find DNA evidence of that trauma would be passed down generations. And to me, that just made intuitive sense, that if a kid is like, their dad is a tennis pro, and the kid is just naturally really good at tennis. Well, is that because the dad's teaching, the nature nurture? Is the dad teaching the kid to play tennis so he's got a really good coach? Or is it muscle memory? Is it that the kid just has a memory of how to swing that he doesn't even know why, but he just, as soon as you put a racket in the kid's hand at 2 years old, it looks like he's swinging it like he's been doing it his whole life. And so to me, that made sense, that there can be a genetic memory that maybe goes something deeper. And so it wasn't science fiction. It wasn't yet science, but it wasn't total science fiction, because there was something intuitive about that to me. And that felt right, that she could have these memories, specifically the stuff that Bob couldn't access, because at that time that she's conceived, it is so prominent for him. It is such the elephant in the room. And it made sense that would be what was transferred. And wouldn't you know, now all the studies that are coming out are showing with mice, they could traumatize male mice, and the children of that mice would inherit those traumas.
Wow.
through the RNA in the male mice's sperm. And so that moment was transferred those memories are transferred at conception. It's evolution's little trick to say, hey kid, in case I'm not around, here's what a cat looks like. Right? Hey baby mouse, this is what a cat looks like.
Yeah.
And you need to be afraid of this.
Yeah.
And specifically that being around traumatic memories that make sense as a survival tactic. And so that was what it was baked in as, and now we're seeing science start to kind of prove that. And Holocaust victims or Holocaust survivors whose grandchildren respond completely differently to stress. Their brain goes into a different area of activity in stressful situations than the rest of us do. And why is that? And is genetic memory sort of part of that? Are we sort of do we relive? Are we reacting on some of the traumas that our ancestors had, or that our generations before us had, without really knowing why we react that way? So to me, that was all fascinating stuff. And so that was where we grounded Charlotte inheriting these memories. And it really doesn't start to come up until that combination of at her age and with hormones starting to come into play. And then this guy shows up.
Yeah.
And she sees that photograph of his face. And then suddenly things are being unleashed, and they're coming in as dreams. They're coming in ways that aren't necessarily real, but feel very real to her.
Yeah.
So,
it was one of my favorite parts of the film. I was trying to ground, like, where are they going with this? And it kept fitting in at the right time. And I was like, I really like this. It's not just a quirky device. It's not science fiction.
Oh, good. Yeah.
There's a connection, obviously, father-daughter. Like you said, the genetic element to it. But I didn't know all this research either. So that's fascinating, too.
We tried to kind of have it be grounded, but we also didn't want to bog the story down in explaining it. Yeah. So that visit to the doctor's office was as far as we wanted to go. Let's just
touch it
Bob
and leave
says,
it alone.
Conception, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. And none of them know where it came from, and that's okay. We didn't want to go to an infographic or
But it's a fascinating subject.
The drawings were something that weren't there in the play either. That she would draw these. We wanted a way to visualize what was going on there, and so that was something we came up with in about 2000. She needs to visualize these things for her father. It can't just be verbal. It needs to be visual, very visual. And then the idea of how it all comes together at the end, that all kind of like materialized for us. And that was when it was like, okay, yes, now we know what this movie is.
And the more she gets, the bigger the... Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. Talk to me about the title and why you went with it.
The original play was called The Activist.
Mm-hmm.
Jerome used to be a eco-terrorist in the original play.
Wow.
And Lucy was an environmental activist. And so you had this weird thing going on there. When we rewrote the story away from the play, all those things went away. And we thought, okay, that title really doesn't work anymore. For many years, we called it The Broken. And then in 2013, when we picked it had been on the shelf for about 6 years. We hadn't touched it. And when we decided we should actually finally make this film, there had been a number of movies made called Broken or The Broken or Unbroken, or and I thought we can't. It just didn't feel right to have that title to it anymore, and I thought we could have something that would be more appropriate. And I don't know that there's anything other than a good brainstorm behind it to explain it beyond that, but we wanted something that sounded visceral. And that had a darkness to it, but that also had a little bit of that theme of balance that's so important in the story. We wanted that reflected in the title as well. We wanted to make sure that was communicated through the title. And so reparation just seemed like the word that encapsulated all of that.
Yeah, it covers it all.
Yeah.
Let's talk about when you heard that you're getting into Austin Film Festival. I know you're you're a Tulsa guy, so you're a Southerner. Being able to showcase it in, the Third Coast, the hub of everything outside of LA and New York. People think to Austin, and being a writers' film festival. This is for the writers. There's obviously the conference. What does that make you feel that your film is one of those picked?
We were thrilled when I got the phone call from Harrison. I was absolutely beside. I had like 3 friends were visiting me from out of town, and my wife was in the car. We had a car full of people, and I was driving, so I had to pull over to take the phone call. And I was like, "What's this 512 number?" I wasn't expecting to hear anything that day or that week, or who knew if we were going to be selected or not. And so it was fun to have a car full of my very, very close friends with me at that moment when I got the phone call. This was, for us, really, I would say, the top festival. Like, this was the one I had the most hopes surrounding. I think because of that being a writers' festival and a writers' conference as well. This was really a dream, and very secretly and quietly, privately, high priority for me in a way that I didn't even really express to many people around, because you don't want to jinx it, and you don't want to let yourself invest too much in anything because you can be disappointed. So we were ecstatic. And yeah, I grew up in Tulsa, not too far away. Actually, my very first job in the movie business as an intern, right out of college, was a TV movie that shot here in Austin. I found out at Sunday night at like 10:30 at night that I got the internship. And I was at my grandparents' house near Oklahoma City on the farm. And I was like, oh crap. So I drove an hour and a half to Tulsa, threw all my shit in the back of my car, my little crappy car. So that's midnight. I had to start at 8 a.m. on Monday. So I drove 8 hours all night, went straight to the production office and straight to work on this internship. So I was here for 6 weeks, and I had a great time. And Austin's a great town.
Wow.
But for me, this coming back to Austin is a little bit of like a homecoming, because it's coming back to where it all kind of started for me, on that very first movie that I ever worked on.
Wow.
That was sort of the beginning of my film school, so to speak.
Very cool. So just for those out there, what are you working on now? I mean, I know you and Steve are writing. Tell us a little bit about what's going to happen next with this film, where it goes, and then for you, where are we going from here?
Well, this is the first. We're doing a bit of a fall circuit, so this is kind of kicking off that circuit. So I'll be on the road for about 3 weeks. We're hitting 4 other festivals. We have a screening at AFM. We have a sales agent now who's working on getting us distribution. So that process starts in about another week and a half.
Wow.
Distributors haven't really seen the film yet. They'll see it at AFM in about a week and a half. So, obviously we're hoping for the best there. So I don't know when, in terms of like when we'll be released and how we'll be released, I really don't know yet. I'm very curious to find out. But probably late winter, spring, something like that, unless a distributor has other plans for it. But yeah, and then, in the meantime, I think Steve is able to start. We've started talking about getting back into the next one. Our next film is a script that we had already been writing as well, like from years ago, and now we've started to think about it and talk about it, and talk about what we need to do to get that one ready. Myself, I can't really go there yet because I have so much work to do on the indie film as a director, and on this one as director and producer and writer and editor, and I kind of have to do everything.
Yeah.
I do all the graphic design. If we need to do a new poster, if we need to crank out DVDs for somebody, or all the marketing, all the social media stuff, I kind of have to do everything myself. And so, at least until we can afford to hire, some more people to help out with that. So I haven't really turned the corner fully into getting the next one ready. I think once we sell this one, I'll feel like, okay, my baby can walk. Now I can go worry about having another one.
Well, you put it perfectly. It's your El Mariachi. It's
Yeah.
you got to see it to the end. You got to make sure he can play.
Yeah.
No, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, Kyle, I can't wait to see where this film goes. I was really blown away, and thanks for the chat. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Thank you.